Good day, and thank you very much for joining us again today to BalCanis Podcast. Today, again, we are offering you this episode with my friend and lawyer, Will Tao. We will be discussing with him about something that you will find to be very, very interesting that he will share with us. He will teach us and show us. Actually, we'll be talking about the temporary visas, the process that immigration officers undergo to make decisions. And what that is called is actually called the Chinook system. But before we go down there, I would like to take the time to thank you, Will, for accepting to be here to participate in our BalCanis episode. I hope this is not going to be the last one. It's the first we are starting with you. We are really enjoying your presence here, and we want to welcome you. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm great. Thank you, Eddy, so much for your invitation. And I know you've been following our work and engaging for so long. And it's, I'm grateful for your audience as well. I think it's important to speak to audiences that usually may not engage with the law as much and, might be outside Canada waiting for entry to Canada with their families. With their whole futures in the hands of the system. So, the more love we can spread, the more information we can spread, I think it's a good thing. So happy to be here and share with your audience.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I would like to mention that Will is the founder of Heron Law Offices, and he also has a podcast that's called Invité Podcast. So Will, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your practice and about yourself?
Yeah, so Heron Law Offices was founded in February of this year. We are a full-service immigration firm. We focus on complex refusals and judicial reviews, family, students, and workers. Those are our main areas. And we actually do a lot of what's called community lawyering. So, taking law outside of just the traditional colonial system and seeing how we can challenge it, rewrite the laws, rewrite policies, speak in media, present, and research. And that's sort of what we do here. And we're doing it for the racialized folks. We're doing it for our racialized communities. And we're doing it for our daughters. So I have a daughter who's 6 months and a bit. And, thinking about the next generation of future lawyers and future Canadians and what that reality looks like is what drives us. And then the podcast.
And the podcast. Yeah.
The podcast. We got to mention the podcast. So Invité Podcast started with Lou, who's based in Toronto. We've just formed this partnership, brotherhood, I would say. I went to law school with Lou. I was a couple years older. And then we just say, hey, we could do a podcast too. Let's do it for, again, the racialized folks. Let's tell the stories of migrants. Let's bring together community. And that's what we've done so far. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
All right. So you mentioned that we're doing it for our daughters, our children. So you have children, right?
Yeah, I have a daughter who's 6 months and a little bit old. And actually, two of my colleagues at Heron also have daughters that were just born this year. So it's almost fortuitous that the same year we start the firm, all our daughters are being born. But that's like it's the impetus. Every day I have a bad day at work. I go home. I don't go home. I go downstairs now that we're working from home. But I go downstairs. I hug my daughter, and everything is right in the world.
That's great. That's great. Congratulations, by the way. I have three children. Yeah, I have two daughters and one boy.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Well, I'm looking for them to growing up. I assume your children probably are a little bit older than my daughter.
my first daughter has she's 16, and my boy is 4 years old.
Oh, wonderful. I'm excited to go on the journey of multiple children as well. And it's such a blessing. It's life-changing. I mean, so
it is a blessing. All right. So why don't we jump in and we are doing this for our community. I really appreciate that you mentioned that. We are here to try and educate and try to teach as much as we can. So we are talking today about the Chinook system. What is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the question we're all asking, because Chinook, there's no public manual on it. Before a court case called Okran involving a Ghanaian student who was refused, and then immigration's decision to release information about the Chinook system, it really was behind the scenes, right? No one really knew what it was, but now we know it's an Excel-based processing tool that is used at visa offices. And, there are a few pilot offices. It's not being used universally right now in terms of the same way at all offices.
Okay.
But through several modules, essentially, the information in your temporary residence application is extracted out of the forms and put into a Excel row, which also contains the information about multiple clients. And it allows the officers to make quicker decisions without having to actually go into each of the documents per se, or have to spend time opening up multiple screens. So it's to make the job easier for officers ultimately, but from an applicant perspective, it's probably extracting less of your story than you would like the immigration to know, and therefore it's rendering decisions based on limited information.
Isn't that a problem, Will?
That's a huge problem, and
Absolutely.
I think, especially for I've been calling them global South countries. I've been calling them high refusal rate countries, but let's be honest, they're where darker skinned folks are from, the Black folks, brown folks in the Middle East and Africa. Those are the folks that are being refused by these systems, right? Because their volumes are so high, and they have the stories to tell too, right? Because on paper, if a 50-year-old from in African countries applying, all the world stereotypes of why are they coming? Are they coming to make a refugee claim? Or, why are they studying at this age? It's accentuated by this racism that's built into the system, that's built in through our colonial immigration system for years. But this system isolates that information. So an officer essentially makes a decision, oh, you are 50 years old and you've been refused before, and that's all I know about you, versus the letter of explanations, the evidence, and all the stuff that tells the actual story.
And so that means obviously that the decision makers makes a decision based on that limited information, raw information, and then just go ahead and refuses your case, probably.
Well, the Chinook, if Chinook were applied universally, and I knew it was the same modules in every visa office, and everybody went through the same vet somehow with some oversight to make sure that the system didn't reinforce racism, or that they sort of filtered to make sure that they're not just determining based on age, gender, and nationality, I would have a little bit more hope, right? But the way I see it now, the way it's being used, yes, it is being used and targeted primarily at high refusal countries. So it's to say, hey, rather than processing one at a time, go ahead and process 25 at a time, or 80 and then 90. And then, there's more volume of applicants, so they can make more decisions just using one row essentially, and then deleting all the notes afterwards, right? So there's so many, it's almost hard to describe Chinook because there's so many constituent elements. But the most problematic part, in my opinion, other than the Excel sort of one page, multiple clients, quick row scan, it's also the refusal generator. That the refusal reasons are now a list of pre-established reasons that you're just plugging in, and that officers are not encouraged to actually do individualized assessments, because the system says, hey, if you want to do that, you're actually going to have to enter some more things. And it promotes cookie cutter refusal reasons that don't actually address the facts and the submissions of the applicants,
or reflect the actual application. Exactly. So why don't we try and see clearly how it works? So let's assume an officer receives an application, and then the information is then transferred from GCMS, which is the Global Management System, to this Chinook system. And then from there, what exactly happens until the decision maker or the officer makes a decision? Can you try and elaborate a little bit and explain?
Well, I think first of all, it depends what visa office, because some of them have, for example, the pre-assessment module, where a pre-assessment officer can enter some notes that they've realized from a review, right? Okay. But in general, assuming it doesn't go under pre-assessment, because that's only a few offices, once the information is in Excel row, it has the information of hundreds of applicants, for example, or whatever that's on the plate of the officer. So the officer then, through that row, has to check off whether to, first to scan it to see, there's multiple fields. So they see the work history for sure. So that's, so we're actually learning more about it because we got a new manual just recently. So I haven't shared about this publicly in a podcast. So I'll talk about a little bit about it.
Okay.
We have a whole podcast on it ourselves coming out. So it's a little bit taster.
I'll be following you, Will.
What they see though is essentially, other than the basic vitals, they'll see the employment and work history.
Okay.
And they'll see the previous GCMS history in their portal thing when they're making a decision. So those are the two main things that they're making decisions off of. And this is actually really interesting because many applicants don't properly set out their employment and work history and education history in the forms, right? For example, there's not enough space. Sometimes you want to put it on attachment, or sometimes you're like, I just was volunteering. Do I need to put this? Or I was unemployed. Does it even matter? But that's the stuff that's pushed straight to the officer, right?
Okay.
And then we know that, for example, negative biometric information or previous refusals to the US are pushed to the officer, right? Along with age, citizenship, how much money they have, purpose of visit. But it doesn't push to, for example, the fact that there is a long, letter of explanation where the applicant tells their story of why they're coming. It just, says tourism, business visit, whatever it might be. And then there's a risk flag section. So these offices have their own risk words that they might flag, or local word flags, like if there's a wedding or a funeral coming, and I don't know how they flag it. If it's necessarily, they're saying it's an expedited flag. I think that there's argument that it could probably flag refusals too, just being like, hey, we don't want this person to come for a wedding, right? But that's what they do. And then based on that row, the one of the first columns is approve or refuse, right? So it's, the problem for me too, is even the way it's set up, it actually tells officers, like, the approve and refuse is actually the first, like one of the first buttons in the row. So you theoretically
start by making the decision and then
justifying afterwards. That's called reverse engineering, or that's the term I put it. So I think it really is a platform for reverse engineering decisions. And then they can also group like applications together, right? So theoretically, this is not artificial intelligence, but the system can organize. It can be like, hey, can we get all the 30 plus year olds or all the people from this city? You can actually organize it so that, applicants of one type are processed by one officer in one, go. And that can lead to mass refusals, right? Everybody refuses at the same time. And we're hearing more of those stories as well now.
Exactly. And we see a lot of similar reasons of refusals that gives the same reason, same wording, and same template. And so all this comes from the system. You think that Chinook system, how long does it has it been used for? Do you have an idea when did they start using it?
I think they started. I just actually did an ATIP on this, so I'm waiting for some results. But in 2018, they started developing it, I believe. But it's really like the most recent iterations are the 2021. There's a 2021 May and a 2020 model. So it's like really the research started a couple years ago, but now it's when they're really like bolstering it. And in fact, ironically, immigration is actually already looking for its replacement. So it's not even going to be here forever. They've already have a tender out. So I did this research as well and found that they already hired a company to replace Chinook, right? So
by what, an AI system or another Excel-based?
That's the question, right? And I think where I'm speaking from and why I'm advocating on this right now is we know that with Chinook, they didn't have. It was an officer-generated tool, right? And you think of the officers from different visa offices meeting together, being like, "Hey, let's create a tool so everyone can process faster." But who's in the room? Is there anybody who's a lawyer or a human rights lawyer or academic or someone to be there being like, hey, you can't really
do this
a flag in one country and not in this country, or if you're flagging someone for being married in Africa but not flagging someone for being married in this country, that's probably racist, and that's probably something that you need to you probably can't build it into the system itself, right? Although, again, immigration, I always say this, but immigration is actually one of the state-sponsored normalized roots of racism, right? Like if you think about it in any other context, right? Like let's say if we took it out of the immigration context and just within our own Canadian borders, and you had a job process or any sort of school process that said, hey, we're going to refuse 90% of people from, African countries and only accept, accept 90% of countries from global north, white countries. That system would never ever be allowed. But because it's immigration, because it's borders, because it's, maintaining national sort of sovereignty and all the other countries have rules about this, it's kind of normalized, right? But I think my role in my advocacy now is to say, hey, let's question some of those foundations. Let's at least make the system transparent, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't want people from certain countries to come, maybe just set up, some other transparent quota, or let them know, or just say, hey, we're limiting people because of whatever X reason.
Exactly.
Don't do it behind the scenes and not tell us and
exactly
give false hope, right?
Do you think they will probably hear and then try go that route, or they will just use make death here and just go ahead or develop whatever system they're still working on? Because I find this to be very contradictory, because immigration says that they are trying to bring in Canada more immigrants. We need people to come here and start working in Canada and contribute to the Canadian economy. But at the same time, they are of course, they've always chosen people that they want to bring in Canada, but why not make it clear so that we know, if you want to get in Canada, you can do this or do this, or if you are from this part of the world, we are limiting you to this number of. Why is it hard to do?
Well, I think quotas have always had a bit of a negative implication that, and again, how would you address quotas, right? Because clearly the demand from some countries and likely are in the global south and in countries like India, like the demands. So I actually did an interesting comparison, and I believe I compared the applications from all the SDS countries. This is the student direct stream countries, which are more high refusal countries, with VESPA countries, which is actually visa exempt, study permit approval, quick, easy approval countries. India alone has 5 times more applicants than all of the 14 countries from VESPA. India alone, right? India has 5 times more. So, from some of these countries, I think that the government just wants to be careful, not to do these outright quotas to suggest that there is some limitation of people, and that could be more overt, explicit sort of.
Okay.
But at a certain time, I kind of agree with you, where it's like, at the end of the day, if you don't do something like that, but the system itself is generating that outcome by refusing folks, you're sort of in the same place, right? And
also because those people are applying, they are paying money for this. Although it's not big, but it represents a lot of money in their respective countries. So they are paying to do this and hoping to, and they're not even getting a fair treatment.
I think that's where not enough attention has been paid, right? And we think here in Canada, like, hey, it's only $100 or $355, and that's like monthly, sometimes yearly salaries in some countries.
Exactly.
Right. And they've had to take out loans and done so many things. And then, there's not proper immigration representation in many countries, which is why I respect your work. It's like, hey, I'm not back in the diaspora. I'm not, here in the community, but I'm doing everything I can to make sure you all have the right information, right? So you're not getting tricked, that you're not getting taken advantage of by the local offices or paying money to line up for biometrics or whatever money, it might be, because there's people trying to milk that money at every step of the road. Right. And that's something, I come at it with a real eye and sensitivity to, yes, you want to attract talent, but you're also taking away people from their home countries. And also, the very process of immigration can leave a lot of people mentally broken and physically, emotionally broken. It's a difficult, challenging process, right? Because they're putting it all into a dream. I think that's where I agree with you. I think here's what I think is going to happen with Chinook, and here's what I hope will happen, at least in the first step. I don't think they're going to abandon it. They've invested too much money. This is the way of the future. There's going to be too many applicants moving forward. They want to still open the doors while limiting the number of people and filtering and choosing. There's going to be more artificial intelligence at the front end and more Chinook style at the back end. I think that's inevitable. But what I hope there will be is, if there is an independent advisory, oversight, non-governmental, mix maybe of some government and some, practitioners and some experts and advisors who can review these systems, right? And do inquiries and ask immigration, hey, can you please provide, proof of what you're doing or how you're applying these rules, or like, what are the the word flags in the different countries.
Mhm.
What are the stats that this system creates, right? Just a couple of years ago, immigration was like, we don't collect race-based stats. We don't collect religious-based stats because we don't want, for administrative purposes or whatever. And now they're kind of opening up to it because they realize that's what the demand is, right?
Yeah,
We need to
exactly.
know if we don't know the stats, we don't know how to tackle racism, right? That's sort of, so I think that that's part of the solution is if you had some independence and
Mhm.
those who can write a report saying, listen, we balance out the immigration's privacy needs and expeditious needs and, financial needs and all those things that they're arguing with the needs of applicants from racialized, countries who've had these historical labels placed on them and all those things. And how do we how do we give them room to, how do we, pause here. I'm trying to think about the right words. How do we make sure that those voices are not lost in our goals to try and just improve the system? How do we ensure that there is client feedback, client intake, and client feedback on it in a meaningful way, not those surveys that they send out, but a meaningful, hey, folks from this country are very concerned that this system is applying racial bias against their decisions. And I think, applicants from Nigeria, you have an argument there, right? Like we just hear.
Yeah. And see, that will bring us to the next point probably, but I'll leave it for the end. The judicial reviews, then we'll have to voice more, go more that route, and try to say that we do not agree with these decisions. But before we get there, what I wanted to point, Will, is that you mentioned earlier that an officer will receive a lot of files from different applicants. Wouldn't that expose that officer for making mistakes?
Yes, and that's another thing. And I think my colleague and friend Zainab Zai, in a Toronto Star interview with Nick Kuhn, said that, like, hey, it's all these rows. How do we even know? Like, can you? Like, I've had to deal with rows in Excels too, and like, how would you know you're entering it into the right column or the row or all those type of things? Yes, I think mistakes are inevitably part of the game, right? And I think what Chinook is a bit, even worse at is none of these mistakes aren't going to be necessarily found, I think, right? Because you're deleting all the working notes, you're deleting rule 3, the module 3, and the GCMS notes are generic, right? So for every client, it reads the exact same. There's no identifying, sometimes there's zero identifying features, right? They don't even bother to go say, hey, this client is this years old, or this client has 3 brothers, and it doesn't say anything. It just says a CLOA, or client's establishment, or is young, single, mobile, without dependents. Like, you can use that. You can just essentially put all of the under some age people and use the same reason to refuse all of them. Or you can find all the old people and say, they're too mature, and studies are not related, or it's been too long since they've studied. You can start doing these cool groupings that would
and without being found. But now, how can these communities do to try and prevent this from happening, or at least voice their concern? Like, majority of those people are outside of Canada. They're trying to come here. How can they? What can they do and even hope to be heard?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because even from applicants from abroad who are applying for temporary residence, from a procedural fairness standpoint, from a system standpoint, have the lowest rights, so to speak. And when it goes to court, even one of the foundational pieces is that the onus is on the applicant to prove that they are not immigrating permanently, that the system, that there is discretion from the officer. Those are all built-in things. I think it's now about not just necessarily walking away if I'm an applicant and I get a refused application. I think now, what I would like to share is that, hey, we know these systems exist, maybe before just, applying again and again because some agent told you all you have to do is apply 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times and then you'll get in. Maybe say, hey, listen, this is not right what they just did to me. I put all this effort in. I had to spend all this money to make this application. Yes, that's drained me, but maybe I should go seek some further legal advice, or someone capable like yourself, and actually challenge them and actually say, hey, you can't just refuse me without looking at my materials at all. And I've actually addressed these points. I think too often the system kind of promotes applicants just to blindly try again or rely on someone to do it without thinking about, hey, let's readdress it. And it doesn't have to be judicial review, right? Because judicial review can be expensive and it can take some time, and it might take multiple months before you get a decision versus reapplying. But in that reapplication, how are you addressing what the officer did? You have the GCMS notes. Can you say, listen, I would like to bring to your attention that the information that you said I don't have is actually here. And, I'm going to repeat it 3 or 4 times. Right.
But Will, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I still see a problem with that. You mentioned that when the application comes in, the information is pulled in from GCMS and transported on the roll. So your second application, it's going to be the same thing, even though you explain it on the letter of explanation. It's going to be the same thing.
That's, again, we need to learn more about Chinook, but what I'm seeing a little bit of is this. I mean, I don't know if this system, first of all, if they're treating all first applications sort of a different way than reapplications versus reconsiderations versus, because I am seeing in some cases where people apply enough times that they start actually being like, hey, let's actually read this. This person's actually, knocked the doors enough times. Let's actually give them a response this time. I'm not saying that's the necessary way. But the problem with promoting court at this stage is, I have to say, the system, even for court, like, yes, you can get some consents from Department of Justice, and when it's sent back on judicial review, an officer will look at that more carefully, because that's, a lawyer has already stepped in on immigration side. But like the cost wise and the timelines, if someone's got, come in a couple months for a, not everyone can afford that, right? And in fact, most people, I would say 90% of the
90%, maybe 95,
maybe even 95% of people. And that's, I'm saying globally too, right? And that includes Global North. Like, if I were to tell you what the fees are for most judicial reviews, I think most clients would be right away like, this is how much I make in maybe multiple years, right? I can't do this. So I don't think that ultimately going to court or logging up a court system is the solution, right? I think what needs to happen is, first of all, more advocacy from folks like you and me, right? Because we aren't there, we are here. We do have positions where people are going to hear our voices. Let's speak out and let's do that front end work. And on the back end, when clients have these situations and they're affected by it, not to sort of just rely on someone, a shop down the road who has no clue what they're doing and no license to do it. Maybe take some initiative and say, hey, you know what, I'll find a lawyer for a consultation or a consultant for a consultation from Canada who is authorized, and let's think about ways we can systemically challenge this, right? And in my reapplication work, ironically, I've been very successful. I don't know if I've been flagged, given represent our clients. I hope so. That'd be nice, right? A positive flag. We know they're flagging, for example, if people use fraudulent consultants or certain people like businesses or whatever, they are being flagged in the system, right?
Yes.
So I don't know. I mean, presumably they could be flagging because you're using certain people to apply for you, and they might be, hey, you know what, this person's going to give us heck, so let's
our time, let's just grant it.
Again, I'm just I'm speculating. I hope that system doesn't exist, because it would go against all of our ethical obligations. We're not supposed to tell clients that we have any special connection, that we have any special ability to do anything. And those are, I think, foundational ethical principles that should outline the system, right? No matter who you are, what you look like, at least everyone gets a relatively fair shake at making their case to be met, right? And we know, unfortunately, that doesn't happen in practice, but it's sort of the ideal that we would like to see, that officers aren't just going to be like, hey, that's another applicant from this country. Like, we refuse 95% of them, we're going to refuse them again, right?
So another question for you, Will, before I get your own advice to client, but what do you think people should be doing, applicants themselves and practitioners, to try and, I will use your term, to try and catch the Chinook or avoid it?
I heard you. That's funny that you've read all that. And so to catch the Chinook, I think a lot of it now, I mean, we're developing some tools, and this is not a perfect toolkit, but certain things we're doing now in our work to try and help our applicants. So number one, a very strong executive summary, a 2 to 2, I would call it the 2-minute case, right? If an officer only has 2 minutes, because they're still supposed to look at the materials in your application, right? There's just no obligation to. So, given how much time they spend, and depending on which visa office and what the volume is, I don't think they're just looking at the row. And I mean, in some cases, they might be, but if they do look at your application for 2-3 minutes and then get to their row and then all the tech stuff they have to do to render a decision. What are they looking at, right? So that's like your strong executive summary, or that's your bullet points to make the case on paper, right? And that makes it difficult for them to address. If you have addressed, the temporary intention, the purpose of visit, the amount of funds you have, whether you'll leave Canada at the end of your stay, family ties, employment opportunities, just, a couple bullet points, it'll make it a little bit more difficult to refuse, right? And then in the application itself, how do you organize it to make it easier for an officer to review, right? So, I think one of the big problems with poor immigration work is just like when you look at it, it's just, you can't find anything. Even when you're looking at it, it's messy. It's, there's no headings, there's no, a bunch of documents are randomly thrown in there. There's no document checklist. Even, the worst I think is for funds too, right? And that's an increasing reason for refusal, especially coming out of the global south. It's like, hey, you have some money, but I don't know where it's coming from or the availability. Yeah. And you just see a bunch of random bank statements, not even sure what the numbers add up to. And supposedly it adds up to some amount without any conversions. Like, so those are things like just simple tips, right? Like just make it cleaner, but then also back it up, right? So it's like, you have to do the 2-minute version, but then you also have to back it up. So individuals like myself, when I go to court, I can say, hey, the applicant put everything in there. It's there. You just, you didn't look at it, right? Because when I do go to court, I need to have that, right? Because if there's gaps and missing things, the Department of Justice will jump all over it. The applicant is required to put their best foot forward. They, have submitted insufficient evidence on X, Y, Z. It was reasonable for the officer to refuse. And that's a hard argument to argue against if there's missing stuff, right? Of course, no application is perfect, but you need to spend enough time to make sure to cover all the gaps and answer all the questions. Okay, we don't believe you have any employment prospects. Well, how are you answering that in your application? Oh, this person has opportunities to get a job back home. Okay, where's the proof of that, right? So there's a chain of like reasoning by which an applicant can definitely strengthen their case by filling those gaps. But again,
so what you're saying is making sure to provide as much information as we can. Well,
both the 2-minute version and then the backup version. So I do 2 applications in one. Give me the 2-minute version and then give me I've covered all your points and I can't be refused on any of these main grounds, because we know what the temporary resident test is. We know what the study permit test is. We know what the work permit test is. It's written in the act, right? And we've seen enough refusals and GCMS enough notes that we know how they're going to address it, right? Family ties, right? So if you have a brother in Canada who's a permanent resident citizen and you don't even mention them in your application, well, that's an insufficiency. And
absolutely,
that's, someone's going to make the assumption that, hey, if you have a brother who's a permanent resident citizen, you're going to come and stay here permanently too, right? So how are you incorporating them? Are they writing a letter saying, hey, I've been compliant and I'll support my brother in compliance? Are they, are other family members in, there's case law that says, you can't just discount all the family members back in your country of residence because you have one brother or one sister in Canada. Where's the other information from the other relatives? Where's that coming out on paper? So I have like a million tips on this kind of stuff, but it's like, and actually, you know what? And this is a little bit unrelated, but I've actually started a coaching practice, and that's what I'm doing mostly is like other practitioners are preparing their applications and with consent sharing, their information with me, and I'm giving some of this feedback to them. I'm saying, hey, what about this? What about that? Right. And I think I'm helping cover some of those gaps for some of my coaching clients.
I actually read about that this morning. I was very impressed. Yeah. I'll reach out. All right. So what do you think then about common mistakes that you see and that you want to point out to applicants directly who are deciding to do this on themselves? And what should they be looking for and trying to avoid? A couple of tricks.
Yeah. I think number one is just doing your research, right? Because obviously you won't have the legal expertise or the case law, or you haven't gone to school or done the consulting program, which I think many programs are really, really good. So you're kind of in the state where you have to make your best case, but you might not have all the tools to do so. But I think the number one thing is to take responsibility for your own materials, and that's especially if you're doing it yourself, but of course, sometimes you'll have an agent or family friend. Don't let anybody submit anything on your behalf without you reviewing it carefully, right? And even if you do it on your behalf, like take that time to review, because the worst thing you can do is right now misrepresentation. And we know the systems are catching for that, right? They're looking to compare what you said now with what you said before, or what's on your LinkedIn with what you wrote, or what you've labeled your work history at versus the letters you've added. And I think that's really important. And of course, just knowing what the test is, right? I think many temporary residents are confused. They just think of it as, hey, I'm coming to Canada temporarily. Of course, I want to come permanently. I'm just going to tell them, all the things they want to hear to convince them, and then I can come to Canada, and then I'll apply for PR here, or whatever I need to do. It's not as simple as that, right? So obviously, understanding dual intention, if that applies to you, and it's a tough test sometimes, and right now it's frankly a broken test, so the immigration is going to have to fix it and make it work a little better. But understanding too, like, what does leaving at the end of the authorized stay mean? What are those, like, that's a foundational test of study, work, visit. What does it mean to leave Canada at the end of the authorized stay? And what do you need to prove in terms of where you're currently at, or where your country of permanent residence is? How do you prove that link to facilitate your ability to leave? And I think that's missed in self-applicants, right? They're just like, hey, I have this important thing, a wedding to go to, my friend's family, whatever, I have to come to Canada. I need to be there, or whatever. I want to be there. Canada is the most beautiful, perfect country in the world for me. It's a democratic country, like, that's really not going to get you, because that's not the test, right? I think just a little bit of knowledge on that is number one. And then, reviewing your work and being extra careful and diligent in what you're submitting is probably number two. So those are my two tips.
All right, perfect. And also retaining services of authorized representative to represent you, like Will Tao here. My friends, I am urging you to contact Will Tao, Heron Law offices. I will let you, Will, provide your contact information for our listeners and viewers. So for those of you who wants to contact him, you've listened to this podcast or viewed this episode on YouTube, you say you want to contact him and talk to him and let him help you, please feel free to do so. Will, please go ahead and provide your contact information.
So our main email inquiry line is info at Heron, Heron, it's like the bird, law, law.ca. And that's where we usually do, we're also modern day sort of pandemic firm, where we're working mostly virtual, mostly from home. We're able to keep costs lower than, at most bigger law firms, because we have this setup. And I mean, the only one thing I would say is that, because of the recent sort of surge in our information and sharing, that the demand for consultations and legal advice is pretty high, and we have to be a little bit more selective in our ability to assist certain clients. So I would just suggest, contacting as soon as possible. There's a lot of deadlines, and judicial review deadlines or refusal, reconsideration. One of the part tests of the elements of the test is how soon has it been since you've been refused. So contact us as soon as possible, and try to give us a little leeway so we can help you the best we can.
All right, perfect. So we are BalCAN Immigration Services as well. So you can also contact us if we feel like we need to work together with Will and Heron Law offices to work on your case. We can do that and try to help as many of you as we can. This is why we are here in business. It's not just making money. It's also being able to help you, our community, and providing you with the best services that we can. I am really, really grateful, Will, for you being here, accepting our invitation. I will not take much of your time. I know we still have a lot to share, and this is the first episode. Maybe we'll have more to talk about Chinook or other topics, if you will. I know you are very busy, but my platform is open. I know you are there with Imlide, with Lou, and all that you do.
We should get you on our podcast, I think, down the road too. We'd love to. I mean, I think there's so many platforms to share. And thank you, Eddy, for the invitation. And thank you for all the listeners for listening. Let's continue to be in conversation. I think that's the most important thing. The moment we stop talking, communicating with each other, we lose sight of the collective, ability to push change and to be change makers in this system. And there's many great things about our system. I think we've done really good during the pandemic, but there's a lot of things to improve, and that's sort of where I position myself, and I think you are as well, Eddy, sharing the news with your applicants and making sure people don't make mistakes that can alter lives. So that's it's good work, and I enjoy being on this podcast with you.
Perfect. Thank you for you, our listeners, for having taken the time to listen to us. Thank you for your time, and we say to you, we will see you next time on our next episode. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Will, and we shall see you next time. Thank you, and bye-bye.